I was in Copenhagen at GoTo conference last year, and I came across a bookstore. It was Risk First Software Development, and I thought that's really interesting because we heard on the panel about the question about should you replace a legacy system, and well, it's all about risk. And then when you get into risk, you realise everything's all about risk. And so I sort of looked at it and thought, I'm going to buy that and read it, and it's a great book. And then wanted to seek out Rob to have a chat and invite him to speak on it today. And it turns out when we were having a quick chat that we've got other connections. But anyway, we'll talk about that over a drink afterwards. So it's lovely to meet you, Rob, finally. Thanks, and great to welcome you to XT25. And take us home to the wrap-up. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks. It's just me between, just got to listen to me for a bit and then it's beer o'clock. So, so I'm basically going to tell you a bunch of stuff that everyone's already told you today and that you knew already. So, hopefully I'm going to leaven that with a kind of an interesting story and make it a bit more sort of fun. But unlike some of the talks we've had today, this is kind of easy on a technical level, whereas some of them have been really full on. I want to talk about how I ended up at FINOS and some emerging trends in the industry that I've seen and where I think this is all going. But first of all, let's take a look at how I got here. Does anyone know which bank this is? Shout it out. Deutsche, well done. It's an easy one, right? They're going to get harder. It's going to be a quiz. But at the start of my career, I worked at Deutsche Bank, and I worked on a piece of software, you can see it here, called MIS3, and this photo was taken in about the year 2000 or something like that. It's really super old. But the interesting thing, the reason I'm showing this on the screen is because when I first met Malcolm, he was like, you worked on MIS3, didn't you? And so we instantly had this trip down memory lane where we were talking about the fact that we both worked on this piece of software that's like old enough to drink now. And so this was my first introduction to the subject of risk management. So I was working in the risk team at Deutsche Bank. And so I've often thought, well, how is it that piece of software is still in use, by the way. I've worked at Deutsche Bank more recently, and it's still there. I don't know if it looks like that anymore, but it's still in production. And so it seems crazy. Lots of the software I write just immediately gets thrown in the bin. So how does this work? We kind of touched on this in the panel. And there's a thing called the Lindy Effect, where the best estimate of how long something is going to last in the future is really how long it's already been around. You have, in cases where you have nothing else to go on, this is kind of your best guess for how long something's going to last. And the fact that MIS3 has survived financial crises and is still there probably means it's going to carry on going. And probably people are tinkering on it and adding things, but yeah, it's still, it's probably going to be like my lasting legacy to the finance industry, which is ironic. Anyway, so whilst I was at Deutsche Bank, I read this book. Who else has read this? Put your hand up if you've... Yeah, lots of people have read this. This was my first book I read about agile software development, which we've dunked on already on the panel so far. But this was 25 years ago. This was like a breath of fresh air compared to everything I'd learned at university about software development. But I never got to do this. Certainly not at Deutsche Bank. This was just like wow, wouldn't it be great if we could have this? So that never really came about. This is the next place I worked. Anyone know where this is? Sorry? Yes, nice one. This was RBS, yeah. So worked here for... I really just put this up to see if you knew where the building was. Worked here, did my MBA, wrote some more risk systems. There was a financial crisis. I worked on like Basel II. Basel II kind of divided risk into a bunch of different areas, like there was market risk and credit risk and operational risk, and it tried to measure those different things for the bank and try and sort of compartmentalize it and get different people to do these different bits. This is what Basel II cared about. And so I was working, trying to deliver Basel II risk systems for the banks. And I'm not going to bother with, it feels like everyone already knows what these things are, so I'm not going to explain what they are. We've got a very intelligent audience here. So yeah, this was kind of stuff I was doing at RBS. And then I worked here. Credit Suisse, nice. I've already met a bunch of people today who used to work at Credit Suisse, so I knew someone was going to get that one. Yeah, and I worked, again, building more risk systems, all that kind of stuff. And while I was there, I actually started building my first open source project. So I worked on this system called Concordian, and I was working in a testing team where we were trying to build tests for the risk systems we were building and make sure that actually they did what it was that the developers said they were going to do and what the architects said they were going to do. And the thing I contributed to Concordian was this. So I wanted to have Excel spreadsheets and get people to write demonstrations of business logic in Excel spreadsheets. And then it's kind of like it then takes that and turns it into a document and runs some code and compares the code with what was specified in the Excel spreadsheet. So basically, the idea of this is that instead of the developer writing the tests and being responsible for the tests breaking and failing and stuff, it was the business analyst who had to write the spreadsheet, and then if the tests were insufficient or not good enough, the business analyst would get it in the neck rather than the developer, which seemed like a reasonable state of affairs for me, and it actually seemed to work out okay. But what this is really doing is this is transferring risk, right? So it's not the developer who's taking on the risk of all these tests anymore. The business analyst is owning some of the risk here. So there's a transfer of risk with this piece of software. Yeah, Credit Suisse was kind of a mad time, and it was kind of the end times of Credit Suisse. And as I was there, I was kind of like, not blogging, but just journaling all the sort of craziness that I saw, which is quite fun. I just kept a little diary of all the sort of weird behavior that I saw. It was kind of really interesting. And so that kind of got me into writing in a kind of way, I guess. Okay, so the important takeaway from this slide is this is risk transference. This is software changing like the balance of risks, I guess, between people. And then I worked here. Who knows this one? Yeah, nice one. It's too easy, this, isn't it? There's too many of you. Okay, so when I got to HSBC, I was like, I'm kind of done with risk systems. I want to work on something completely different. And so I started working on chatbots with the Symphony chat platform. And at the time, there was this thing called the Symphony Software Foundation, which was starting to form. We'll see how that comes back later. But yeah, so I was working on chatbots, building bots that you could talk to on the Symphony platform. And Symphony was trying to, it was kind of like allowed people in different banks to talk to each other and all this cool stuff. And actually, for the first time, I got to do some agile. So this is kind of like 15, I don't know, years later. I finally got to do some agile, and it completely didn't work at all. And it wasn't Scrum's fault, right? That wasn't the problem, okay? What the problem was is that everyone on the team hated one another. It was really as simple as that. We had like a whole bunch of different people all building different chatbots, never really seeing eye to eye on what they wanted to do. They all had multiple objectives, and somehow we were trying to cram this into something that Scrum thought was a good idea, and it didn't really work out. So yes, I started to think at that point, actually, this is not really how I'm developing software. This is not what I'm doing. What I'm really trying to do is manage risk. And when things are going wrong on the project, I'm looking at the project and I'm thinking, what are the biggest risks here that are going wrong? What are the biggest problems I'm facing? How can I minimize those risks? And so just to I'm going to give a quick example, and then I'm going to actually talk about stuff that we've heard about today and try and see how this matches up. But Kent Beck, the guy who wrote that Agile Extreme Programming book, he also wrote JUnit, right? And the idea of JUnit is that it's a testing, it's one of many now testing, unit testing frameworks. But unit testing, the idea of it, it kind of also messes with risk. It moves risk around. So you kind of have a choice, right? You could work in a world without unit tests, and maybe you end up writing more manual tests, and you have the risk of regressions happening. Or you could write unit tests, and you own more complexity. You have code that actually is just for unit testing, and it takes time to write them, which maybe you could spend doing other things. But on the other hand, you've reduced that regression risk, and you've maybe added quality. So there's kind of a decision about which risks you want to choose here, right? If I write unit tests, maybe I'm reducing some kinds of risks, and if I don't write them, maybe I'm increasing other kinds of risks or whatever. And I think this has been kind of, like, I've been listening today, and I think this is kind of the story of what we've been talking about today. Like, Henry was talking about LLMs and using LLMs for titling documents, and he was saying, it's great, we were reducing the cost. The cost of doing this was much less. But we really didn't want to be tripped up by the LLM being wrong, so we were like applying all this testing methodology around it. So there's a risk management process. Obviously, reducing costs, that's reducing a risk, but managing the risk of that being wrong is also reducing risk. And then Dave talked about latency and the idea that his customers want to sell something quickly or buy something quickly, and that's kind of reducing a market risk. But at the same time as reducing latency, he wanted to have high availability, which is kind of a dependency risk. He's trying to make sure that dependency is available when his users need it. So he's trying to square a circle there of different risks and managing different risks. And then finally, Alexei talked about, like trying to abstract over dependencies. And so I think this was like SaaS dependencies. And so if you're depending on a SaaS, let's write an abstraction layer around that and then talk to that. And this is managing like a lock-in risk. You don't want to be locked into that dependency. You want to be able to swap it out. And so I think that's the risk that he's trying to manage there. But obviously the downside of that is you might end up with more complexity in your code base. You actually have to manage and own more code. So there's a trade-off going on here. And I was going to talk about this example, but that's enough examples, right? We all want to have a beer. So yeah, there's different patterns of risk, essentially. Like we've talked about some of these already, like coordination risk. We talked about bus factors and staff risk and stuff like that. And obviously this book is really famous as well. Who's read this one? Yeah, right, okay, nearly everyone. This is about software patterns. And it strikes me that risks are also patterns as well. We start to see the same risk cropping up over and over again. Just like the Basel guys, well, like you've got market risk, you've got credit risk, you've got operational risk. As software developers, we see the same risks cropping up over and over again. And I mean, patterns are useful all over the place. There's this great website, TV Tropes. If you haven't seen this, don't look at it because you will spend hours looking at it. It's like all the patterns around writing TV programs, books, stories, all these patterns, and it's a real rabbit hole. You can't stop clicking. So patterns exist all over the place, and people use them a lot. And even like the HM government writes this national risk register, where it looks at patterns for like things going wrong in the UK, like coastal flooding or surface water flooding. And then they break that down and say, oh, this might be the impact to this. And they're managing risks at the level of the whole of the UK, theoretically, I hope. I hope they're doing that. So we've got banking regulations, we've got governments, we've got software development teams, we've got the talks we've had today. And I think also, like going back to the backlog ideas, all of the stuff we end up putting in our backlog, really, you could look at that as different ways of managing risk as well. So usually you're writing a ticket because you're worried about some risk happening or a customer not being happy or some dependency failing or something like that. It all comes down to risk. And so I thought I'd write a book about this, the one Malcolm showed up earlier. And I self-published this in 2019, which was just basically me banging away on the keyboard, trying to get all these ideas out of my head and think about that. But it turns out that Kent Beck kind of beat me to it, because the first sentence of his book was the basic problem of software development is risk. So there's no new ideas, are there, really? Then I worked here. Anyone? This is Street View, so it's kind of a bit tricky. That's a bit of Canary Wharf. No, not JP Morgan. Sorry? Kind of a trick question, because this is also Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank, yeah. So yeah, whilst I was at Deutsche Bank, I was also writing Symphony bots again. And what I found almost immediately was that I was basically rewriting a lot of the same software that I'd written back at HSBC just down the road. And so one of the things that Deutsche Bank were kind of experimenting with at the time was, well, how about we start publishing our own open source software? And so working with the open source program office at Deutsche Bank, I published this library called Springbot. And if you were paying attention earlier, you saw it was on Rima's slide. So whilst we were at Deutsche Bank, we were able to donate that to FINOS. So Springbot is now a FINOS project, and you can use it for like writing bots on Teams and Symphony. And I still have meetings with the people at Deutsche Bank. This is used in production at Deutsche Bank as well. They send tons of messages with this. And we have meetings every week, so I'm still able to work on the same software that I worked on at Deutsche Bank, but in my new job at FINOS. And actually, when I left Deutsche Bank, I was kind of tossing up whether to take a job with Juxt or FINOS, and I went with FINOS, but hopefully they don't mind too much. They had me doing this, so maybe it's okay. Anyway, so at FINOS, I've been working on this project again. Rima's done the heavy lifting here, called Open Source Readiness. And this is all about trying to help financial services firms make the most of open source. So the fact that I was able to donate code to an open source project at Deutsche Bank is really unusual. It's still really unusual. It's becoming, through the efforts of key individuals at various financial services firms and the work of FINOS, it's becoming more normal, but it's still not that usual. But one of the things that we've done with this is, as Rima said, we got together a whole bunch of people working in financial services, and we mapped out the problem. And believe it or not, we mapped it out as risks. We were like, well, what are the risks that banks face in doing open source? What are the risks they face in doing it, and what are the risks they face in not doing it? And how can we mitigate the ones that they face by doing it? Things like data leakage and code-based risk. And how can we mitigate the ones that they face by not doing it? Like the fact that they get left behind, or they have no control over the projects they're using, or maybe they're relying on some open source project and its maintainers drift away. What happens then? These are big risks for banks. And so we kind of mapped all this out, all the risks mitigations, all the sort of activities you can do to manage them and all this kind of stuff. So this is a huge risk management project in a way. And it's kind of the same story with common cloud controls, which is all about trying to build secure components for cloud infrastructure that banks can rely on, trying to build a common standard that all the banks can use and all the CSPs can use and agree on, and really sort of mutualize the cost of doing cloud. And we look at, and common cloud controls is all about risks too. We have threats and mitigations and features and things, and we're sort of publishing standards on that. And there's companies, there's things like MITRE ATT&CK, which probably a lot of people have heard of, which is all about publishing the ways in which cyber attackers attack your systems and what you can do about those things. So again, this is another kind of risk-based approach. This is a graph of CVEs by year. And as you can see, this is alarmingly exponential. This is going up quite at a staggering rate. And maybe 2025 won't eclipse 2024. That's kind of a high number there. But this is going in one direction, really. This gives you an idea that the risks that we face of running open source software and running software in the cloud are increasing. They're getting worse. Attackers are getting cleverer. And they're doing more to challenge us. This is something I kind of wanted to expand on this, but honestly, I'm just going to leave that there. That is a worry that we have to address as risk management experts or software development experts. And Rima also talked about what FINOS is doing with AI and how we've got AI controls. But there's this project by the MIT, which is trying to gather together all of the different efforts in AI controls. And they've got like 56 different frameworks for controls. And they don't even have the FINOS one in there. We should really tell them about it. So that's 57 really in the world, clearly no more than that. And actually with risk first as well, I'm kind of trying to look at, well, what are the risks with AI as part of risk first? It seems very relevant to software development risks as well. And so I'm kind of writing a second edition version of this book. So hopefully at some point when I get it finished, it will be published by the Pragmatic Bookshelf. So maybe that's a future topic. If anyone wants to come and help me proofread this, by the way, then let me know. I'd really appreciate it. Right. So kind of looking forward, right? Given all of these this sort of focus on risk, it feels like with AI, people fall into one of these three camps, or maybe they sort of change camps on a fairly regular basis. Between it's not going to pan out, or it's going to be amazing, or we're all going to die. It's going to be Terminator 2. Now, this is kind of where we fit in, really. Probably all of these things are in the balance, but as technologists, we have these amazing tools, these awesome tools that are in our control now. And it's up to us, really, to try and steer the ship here a bit and make sure that when we deploy a system, when we make something real, we consider the risks to it and the risks to everyone else around it and make sure that we try and steer towards the middle ground of this. I don't know whether in the future we'll have another AI winter. The tools we have are pretty amazing, but I think we'll probably see way more improvements to come. And then, obviously, as time goes by, what we regard as AI seems to change, doesn't it? So, like, originally, things like chess computers and lights that turned on when you came in the room, these were, like, really intelligent things, artificially intelligent things back 10, 20 years ago. But nowadays, we just regard that as just technology. And then the stuff in the middle, the AI stuff, is like LLMs and things now. But then on the right-hand side, there's the stuff we don't even know about yet, these kind of like unknown unknowns. And I think things that we're already starting to see the limitations of AI, like we've mentioned hallucinations a bunch of times, but like things like the ability to learn new stuff and handling emotions and the limited modality of AI at the moment. This is all stuff that we've only started to appreciate now that we've got what we have in the middle. So anyway, I think what this all says is that things are increasing exponentially, right? Everything is going up and to the right. I got Gemini to produce this graph, and I think this says everything, right? So it's had some great fun with the axes on this, and some of the spelling is off. But I love the effort that it's put into this. It's given it a really good college try. Things are going up exponentially, right? This is happening, maybe at a greater or lesser extent, and maybe the tech we have now might not be the tech we end up with eventually, but things are getting better faster and faster. And I think when you look at the types of projects we're seeing in FINOS and the way things are moving towards like risk management across different technologies, AI, cloud, open source, I think it seems to me like we are becoming risk managers rather than just developers. This kind of feels like the evolution of our jobs in a way. So although I wrote this book in 2019, I kind of feel that this is evidenced more and more now, that really what we're turning into in the AI age is risk managers. We have this incredible technology at our disposal. We just need to make sure it's put to the right uses. And Nassim Taleb said, "We've survived 200,000 years as humans. Don't you think there's a good reason we survived? We're good at risk management." And I think that's where I'm going to leave it. We need to make sure we keep improving risk management and improve the tools. So like I was building risk systems back in the early 2000s, we need to keep building risk systems, but for the technology that we're faced with today and the exponentially increasing tech that we're going to have in the future. Right, let's get some beers.
Yeah, do we have time for questions? Yeah, if anyone has a question for Rima or Rob. Do you want me to go, Joe?
There's one on your left there, Mel.
Yeah. Yeah, Rob's on his way. Oh, sorry, Joe's on his way.
Hi. We haven't really talked about cybersecurity risks today. What's your view on that?
Wow. So that Common Cloud Controls project does sort of touch on cybersecurity risks. That is a cybersecurity risk mitigation project, really, as well as cost control. It's about mitigating cybersecurity risks. But I think, and there are various different efforts in the Linux Foundation as a whole to address cybersecurity. It's a big topic, not just like cloud, but supply chain security. All of this stuff is getting a lot of attention. It seems like every few months we have some new crazy vulnerability gets discovered, and we all have to go back to work at the weekend and like try and patch things. This can't last, right? That graph of CVEs increasing, there has to be some better solution to this, and I think there's a lot of people hunting around looking for that at the moment.
Yeah, and we're starting, recently we've received some inquiries around financial crime and cybersecurity, and how can FINOS help? So it could be an area of further development as well.
Come and join one of our working groups, or one of the Linux Foundation working groups on this. Get involved.
Anyone else?
Ready for a drink, maybe?
Actually, Rob, have you found that in...
Use the mic.
Is this picking me up? There we go. There we go. I wondered if you had found that in documenting and cataloguing these risks, do you find that the more that people talk about these risks, let's say the risk of developing open source software, how do you sort of mitigate the problems of people and organizations just becoming more risk averse the more that they talk about and explore all of the possible risks?
Wow. I mean, that's a really good question. I think risk goes both ways, doesn't it? I think you can look at like the upside and the downside of risks. And so a lot of people in organizations will take the negative view, oh, we need to protect this, we need to look after that. But usually you can also frame things in opportunity lost, or we're not going to be able to, play in this market, or something like that. And so those kind of turn out to look a lot like risks as well. I think there is a framing thing here. And the other thing is that by talking about risks with people, this seems to be something you can use up and down the org chart, right? People in, like your CEO might not understand what you're talking about when you talk about technical debt. But if you talk about there is a huge risk in the code base that we have lots of unmanaged code, it's kind of old and it could cause X, Y, Z in production, it's an operational risk, they might start to listen, or they should listen. That gives them a handle on what could happen.
And obviously, I think there's a lot to think about when it comes to risk and regulation, and making sure that we don't leave innovation behind. And certainly in AI, I think we're seeing an interesting kind of evolution there to ensure that there is the right balance, because the AI maybe is moving more quickly than regulators can plan for, and that's where industry self-regulation can become such a powerful force for good. What is the right approach? That's kind of what the governance framework is all about, where we look at the risks, but in a way that's manageable, and it's going to have to continuously be updated because of the challenges that are being presented.
Sure.
Sorry to steal thunder. So we make Aeron open source. There's a whole pile of users that use it. One of the benefits of being part of a commercial organization that also makes money from it, Aeron open source is the foundation of almost everything that we do as Adaptive. That means we have some money to be able to invest in exactly that kind of governance that you've just mentioned. So, we have an ISO 27001 certification for everything that we make, including the open source stuff. Everything goes through our bill of materials systems and is constantly monitored for threats. And I guess, it's super interesting. Open source doesn't exist in isolation. Yes, there's the obvious community model where there's a thing that sits out there with no ownership, with some governance about how things are being committed into the repo. But I guess with us as a commercial organization, we absolutely have to do that stuff. And we use our commercial side of the business to help us to fund it. Don't know if that helps, but...